And thank you all for the congratulations on my partner anniversary. A little anniversary, which I did not know was today. But I am so grateful, and thank you all nonetheless. It's been 6 years. Wait, can someone Photoshop me onto the lady from Titanic? Can someone Photoshop me as Rose saying it's been 6 years? Thank you so much. Wait, why isn't this in my notifications? Thank you, Pumpkin Cakes. Thank you for the $5 chat highlight. Looking at Anticlimacus. For real, Anticlimacus makes the best memes. When I'm a millionaire, I'll pay him $1 million in salary. Just for the memes he's already created. Never let go. I'll never let go, chat. While I was studying to be an anthropologist, I was also working as a police reporter for the famous Chicago City News Bureau for $28 a week. One time they shifted me from the night shift to the day shift. Sorry, I fucked it up again. While I was studying to be an anthropologist, I was also working as a police reporter for the famous Chicago City News Bureau for $28 a week. One time they switched me from the night shift to the day shift, so I worked 16 hours straight. We were supported by all the newspapers in town, and the AP and the UP and all of that. And we would cover the courts and the police stations and the fire department and the Coast Guard out on Lake Michigan and all that. We were connected to the institutions that supported us by means of pneumatic tubes that ran under the streets of Chicago. Reporters would telephone in stories to writers wearing headphones, and the writers would stencil the stories on mimeograph sheets. The stories were mimeographed and stuffed into the brass and velvet cartridges, which the pneumatic tubes ate. The very toughest reporters and writers were women who had taken over the jobs of men who had gone to war. And the first story I covered, I had to dictate over the telephone to one of those beastly girls. It was about a young veteran who had taken a job running an old-fashioned elevator in an office building. The elevator door on the first floor was ornamental iron lace. Iron ivy snaked in and out of the holes. There was an iron twig with 2 iron lovebirds perched upon it. This veteran decided to take his car into the basement, and he closed the door and started down. But his wedding ring caught on all the ornaments. So he was hoisted into the air, and the floor of the car went down, dropped out from under him, and the top of the car squished him. So it goes. So I phoned this in, and the woman who was going to cut the stencil asked me, "What did his wife say?" "She doesn't know yet. It just happened," I said. "Call her up and get a statement." "What?" "Tell her you're Captain Finn of the police department. Say you have some sad news. Give her the news and see what she says. So I did. She said about what you would expect her to say. There was a baby, and so on. When I got back to the office, the woman writer asked me, just for her own information, what the squashed guy had looked like when he was squashed. I told her. Did it bother you? She asked. She said. Did it bother you? She said. She was eating a Three Musketeers candy bar. Heck no, Nancy, I said. I've seen lots worse than that in the war. Even then, I was supposedly writing a book about Dresden. It wasn't a famous air raid back then in America. Not many Americans knew how much worse it had been than Hiroshima, for instance. I didn't know that either. There hadn't been much publicity. I happened to tell a University of Chicago professor at a cocktail party about the raid as I had seen it, about the book I would write. He was a member of the committee. He was a member of a thing called the Committee on Social Thought. And he told me about the concentration camps and about how the Germans had made soap and candles out of the fat of dead Jews, and so on. All I could say was, I know, I know, I know. World War II had certainly made everyone very tough. And I became a public relations man for General Electric in Schenectady, New York, and a volunteer fireman in the village of Alpes, where I bought my first home. My boss there was one of the toughest guys I ever hoped to meet. He had been a lieutenant colonel in public relations in Baltimore. While I was in Schenectady, he joined the Dutch Reformed Church, which is a very tough church indeed. He used to ask me sneeringly sometimes why I hadn't been an officer, as though I'd done something wrong. My wife and I had lost our baby fat. Those were our scrawny years. We had a lot of scrawny veterans and their scrawny wives for friends. The nicest veterans in Schenectady, I thought. The kindest and funniest ones. The ones who hated the war the most were the ones who really fought. I wrote the Air Force back then, asking for details about the raid on Dresden. Who ordered it? How many planes did it? Why they did it? What the desirable results had been, and so on. I was answered by a man who, like myself, was in public relations. He said that he was sorry, but the information was still top secret. I read the letter out loud to my wife, and I said, "Secret? My God, from whom?" We were United World Federalists back then. I don't know what we are now. Telephoners, I guess. We telephone a lot. Or I do, anyway, late in the night. A couple of weeks after I telephoned my old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, I really did go see him. That must have been in 1964 or so. Whatever the last year was for the New York World's Fair. Ehu fugaces lebuntorani. I don't know what that is or what that means. My name is Jan Janssen. There was a young man from Stamboul. I took 2 little girls with me, my daughter, Nanny, and her best friend, Allison Mitchell. They had never been off Cape Cod before. When we saw a river, they had to stop so they could stand by it and think for a while. They had never seen water in that long and narrow, unsalted form before. The river was the Hudson. There were carp in there, and we saw them. They were as big as atomic submarines. They were as big as atomic submarms. We saw waterfalls, too. Streams jumping off cliffs into the valley of the Delaware. There were lots of things to stop and see. And then it was time to go. Always time to go. The little girls were wearing white party dresses and black party shoes, so strangers would know how nice they were. Time to go, girls, I'd say, and we would go. And the sun went down, and we had supper in an Italian place. And then I knocked on the front door of the beautiful stone house of Bernard V. O'Hare. I was carrying a bottle of Irish whiskey, like a dinner bell. I met his nice wife, Mary, to whom I dedicate this book. Actually, this is fucking true. I didn't even read the dedications. Dedicated, I know you can't read it, but for Mary O'Hare and Gerard Mueller, who have already both been mentioned, which is their fake names, I assume. I met his nice wife, Mary, to whom I dedicate this book. I dedicate it to Gerard Mueller, the Dresden taxi driver, too. Okay, so that's who Gerard Mueller is, the Dresden taxi driver. Mary O'Hare is a trained nurse, which is a lovely thing for a woman to be. That's their RuneScape names. Mary admired the 2 little girls I'd brought, mixed them in with her own children, sent them all upstairs to play games and watch television. It was only after the children were gone that I sensed that Mary didn't like me, or didn't like something about the night. She was polite but chilly. It's a nice cozy house you have here, I said, and it really was. I've fixed up a place where you can talk and not be bothered, she said. Good, I said. And I imagined 2 leather chairs near a fire in a paneled room, where two old soldiers could drink and talk. But she took us into the kitchen. She had put two straight-backed chairs at a kitchen table with a white porcelain top. That tabletop was screaming with reflected light from a 200-watt bulb overhead. Mary had prepared an operating room. She put only one glass on it, which was for me. She explained that O'Hare couldn't drink the stuff since the war. My fucking eyeball. Oh my god. She explained that O'Hare couldn't drink the hard stuff since the war. So we sat down. O'Hare was embarrassed, but he wouldn't tell me what was wrong. I couldn't imagine what it was about me that could burn up Mary so. I was a family man. I'd been married only once. I wasn't a drunk. I hadn't done her husband any dirt since the war. She fixed herself a Coca-Cola, made a lot of noise banging the ice cube tray in the stainless steel sink, and then she went to another part of the house. But she wouldn't sit still. She was moving all over the house, opening and shutting doors, even moving furniture around to work off anger. I asked O'Hare what I had done or said to make her act that way. "It's all right," he said. "Don't worry about it. It doesn't have anything to do with you." That was kind of him. He was lying. It had everything to do with me. So we tried to ignore Mary and remember the war. I took a couple of belts of the booze that I had brought. We would chuckle or grin sometimes, as though the war stories were coming back. But neither one of us could remember anything good. O'Hare remembered one guy who got into a lot of wine in Dresden before it was bombed, and we had to take him home in a wheelbarrow. It wasn't much to write a book about. I remembered two Russian soldiers who had looted a clock factory. They had a horse-drawn wagon full of clocks. They were happy and drunk. They were smoking huge cigarettes that they had rolled in newspaper. That was about it for memories. And Mary was still making noise. She finally came out in the kitchen again for another Coke. She took another tray of ice cubes from the refrigerator, banged it into the sink, even though there was already plenty of ice out. Then she turned to me. Let me see how angry she was, and that the anger was for me. She had been talking to herself. So what she said was just a fragment of a much larger conversation. "You were just babies then," she said. "What?" I said. "You were just babies in the war. Like the ones upstairs." I nodded that this was true. We had been foolish virgins in the war, right at the end of childhood. "But you're not going to write it that way, are you?" This wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I don't know," I said. Well, I know, she said. You'll pretend you were men instead of babies, and you'll be played in the movies by Frank Sinatra and John Wayne or some of those other glamorous, war-loving, dirty old men. And the war will look just wonderful, so we'll have a lot more of them. And they'll be fought by babies like the babies upstairs. So then I understood. It was war that made her so angry. She didn't want her babies or anybody else's babies killed in wars. And she thought that wars were partly encouraged by books and movies. So I held up my right hand and I made her a promise. Mary, I said, I don't think that this book of mine is ever going to be finished. I must have written 5,000 pages by now and thrown them all away. If I ever do finish it, though, I give you my word of honor. There won't be a part for Frank Sinatra or John Wayne. I tell you what, I said. I'll call it the Children's Crusade. She was my friend after that. I'm gonna go pee again, and then I'm gonna try to finish the chapter. There's like 3 more pages. 3. That's not a lot. I know you can only count to 4, but it's not that high. Thank you, everybody. I'm not gonna lie, I almost cried during the Mary lines. But I didn't, because I'm a man. I ain't no Mary. Strong like penis. Don't worry, it gets happier. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm really enjoying the way he writes as well. I've always loved Kurt Vonnegut, but I haven't read this book. I actually haven't read much Kurt Vonnegut since I was 15. So Damn it, Arashi. Uga! Damn it, Uga! You're supposed to be running the ad breaks while I'm peeing. Just kidding. I don't even know if Uga's here anymore. God bless him. We'll wait for the ad. Alright, thank you. Alright, hopefully no more ads should happen for the rest of the chapter. Oh, Rainbow Flows, by the way. Hello and thank you. Wait, how can you even hear this if there's an ad? Alright, whatever. Let's go back. Mary. My lovely wife, Mary. I mean, my friend's wife, Mary. We'll call it the Children's Crusade. She was my friend after that. O'Hare and I gave up on remembering. Went into the living room talking about other things. We became curious about the real Children's Crusade. So O'Hare looked it up in a book he had. Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay, LLD. It was first published in London in 1841. Mackay had a low opinion of all crusades. The Children's Crusade struck him as only slightly more sordid than the 10 Crusades for grown-ups. O'Hare read this handsome passage out loud. History, in her solemn page, informs us that the Crusaders were but ignorant and savage men, that their motives were those of bigotry, unmitigated, and that their pathway was one of blood and tears. Romance, on the other hand, dilates upon their piety and heroism, and portrays in her most glowing and impassioned hues their virtue and magnanimity, their imperishable honor they acquired for themselves, and the great services they rendered to Christianity. And then O'Hare read this. Now what was the grand result of all these struggles? Europe expended millions of her treasures and the blood of 2 million of her people, and a handful of quarrelsome knights retained possession of Palestine for about 100 years. Mackay told us that the Children's Crusade started in 1213, when 2 monks got the idea of raising armies of children in Germany and France, and selling them in North Africa as slaves. 30,000 children volunteered, thinking they were going to Palestine. They were no doubt idle and deserted children, who generally swarm in great cities, nurtured on vice and daring, said Mackay, and ready for anything. Pope Innocent III thought that they were going to Palestine too, and he was thrilled. These children are awake while we are asleep, he said. Most of the children were shipped out of Marseille, and about half of them drowned in shipwrecks. The other half got to go to North Africa, where they were sold. Through a misunderstanding, Some children reported for duty at Genoa, where no slave ships were waiting. They were fed and sheltered and questioned kindly by good people there, then given a little money and a lot of advice, and sent back home. "Hooray for the good people of Genoa," said Mary O'Hare. I slept that night in one of the children's bedrooms. O'Hare had put a book for me on the bedside table. It was Dresden, History, Stage, and Gallery by Mary Endell. It was published in 1908, and its introduction began, "It is hoped that this little book will make itself useful. It attempts to give to an English reading public a bird's eye view of how Dresden came to look as it does, architecturally, of how it expanded musically through the genius of a few men, to its present bloom, and it calls attention to certain permanent landmarks in art that make its gallery the resort of those seeking a lasting impression." I read some history farther on. Now, in 1760, Dresden underwent siege by the Prussians. On the 15th of July began the cannonade. The picture gallery took fire. Many of the paintings had been transported to the Königstein, but some were seriously injured by splinters of bombshells, notably Francia's Baptism of Christ. Furthermore, the stately Kreuzkirch Tower, from which the enemy's movements had been watched day and night, stood in flames. It later succumbed. In sturdy contrast with the pitiful fate of the Kreuzkirch stood the Frauenkirch, from the curves of whose stone dome the Prussian bombs rebounded like rain. Frederick was obliged finally to give up the siege because he learned of the fall of Glatz, the critical point of his new conquest. "We must be off to Silesia so that we do not lose everything." The devastation of Dresden was boundless. When Goethe, as a young student, visited the city, he still found sad ruins. "Von der Kuppel der Frauenkirche sah ich dies leidigen Trümmersweisen die schon staatliche Ordnung hineingelassen. Da rühmt mir der Küster dies Kunst des Baumwisters, welcher Kirch und Kuppel auf einen so unerwünschten Fall schon ingerichtet und bombenfest erbaut hat. Der gut Sakristan datiert mir alsdann auf Ruinen nach allen Seiten und sagt bedenklich lakonisch, das hat der Feind getan. And there's no translation, so God knows. Thank you. The two little girls and I crossed the Delaware River, where George Washington had crossed it. The next morning, we went to the New York World's Fair, saw what the past had been like, according to the Ford Motor Company, and Walt Disney. saw what the future would be like, according to General Motors. Bruh, this is literally, I told you guys it's all vibes. I pick all my books off of vibes. That's why the last novel we finished was Brave New World. And then my vibes were like tingling and they were like, read Slaughterhouse Five now. Oh, and there was something else fun. There's literally a character in one of these books that was in Brave New World. I don't remember their name. Helmholtz. I remembered their name. It was Helmholtz. There's a character called Helmholtz in one of these books by Kurt Vonnegut. Helmholtz Watson is an Alpha Plus in Brave New World. And then this is, according to Ford Motor Car Company and Walt Disney, that was the past, and what the future would look like according to General Motors. And I asked myself about the present, how wide it was, how deep it was, and how much of it was mine to keep. Dude, I'm so in love with this already. I asked myself about the present, how wide it was, how deep it was, how much of it was mine to keep. I taught creative writing in the famous Writer's Workshop at the University of Iowa for a couple of years after that. I got into some perfectly beautiful trouble, got out of it again. I taught in the afternoons. In the mornings, I wrote. I was not to be disturbed. I was working on my famous book about Dresden. And somewhere in there, a nice man named Seymour Lawrence gave me a 3-book contract. And I said, okay, the first of my 3 will be my famous book about Dresden. The friends of Seymour Lawrence call him Sam. And I say to Sam now, Sam, here's my book. It is so short and jumbled and jangled, Sam, because there is nothing intelligent to say about massacre. Sam, I am. It is so short and jumbled and jangled, Sam, because there is nothing intelligent to say about massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead. To never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be quiet after a massacre. And it always is. Except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about a massacre. Things like poo-tea wheat. I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in any massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that. Poo-tea wheat. As I've said, I recently went back to Dresden with my friend, O'Hare. We had 1,000,000 laughs in Hamburg, and in West Berlin, and in East Berlin, and Vienna, and Salzburg, and Helsinki, and in Leningrad, too. It was very good for me because I saw a lot of authentic backgrounds for made-up stories, which I will write later on. One of them will be Russian Baroque, and another will be No Kissing, and another will be Dollar Bar, and another will be If the Accident Will, and so on, and so on. There was a Lufthansa plane that was supposed to fly from Philadelphia to Boston to Frankfurt. O'Hare was supposed to get on in Philadelphia, and I was supposed to get on in Boston. And off we'd go. But Boston was socked in, so the plane flew straight to Frankfurt from Philadelphia. And I became a non-person in the Boston fog. And Lufthansa put me in a limousine with some other non-persons and sent us to a motel for a non-night. The time would not pass. Somebody was playing with the clocks, and not only with the electric clocks, but the wind-up kind too. The second hand on my watch would twitch once, and a year would pass. And then it would twitch again. There was nothing I could do about it. As an earthling, I had to believe whatever clocks said. And calendars. I had 2 books with me, which I'd meant to read on the plane. One was Words for the Wind by Theodor Rothko, and this is what I found in there. I wake to sleep, I take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. My other book was Erika Ostrovsky's Céline and His Vision. Céline was a brave French soldier in the First World War until his skull was cracked. After that, he couldn't sleep, and there were noises in his head. He became a doctor, and he treated poor people in the daytime, and he wrote grotesque novels all night. No art is possible without a dance in death. Without a dance with death, he wrote. No art is possible without a dance with death, he wrote. The truth is death, he wrote. I've fought nicely against it as long as I could. Danced with it, festooned with it, waltzed it around, decorated it with streamers, titillated it. Time obsessed him. Miss Ostrovsky reminded me of the amazing scene in Death on the Installment Plan, where Céline wants to stop the bustling of a street crowd. He screams on paper, "Make them stop. Don't let them move anymore at all. There, make them freeze. Once and for all, so that they won't disappear anymore." I looked through the Gideon Bible in my motel room for tales of great destruction. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into the Zoar, I read. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. So it goes. Those were vile people in both those cities, as is well known. The world was better off without them. And Lot's wife, of course, was told not to look back where all those people and their homes had been. But she did look back. And I love her for that, because it was so human. So she was turned to a pillar of salt. So it goes. People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I've finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure. And it had to be, since it was written by a pillar of salt. It begins like this. Listen. Billy Pilgrim has become unstuck in time. It ends like this. Poo tea wheat.